So last week
Yeah.
we looked at that first half of John 10. Are we right to just keep going from the second half where it changes to is it the Feast of Dedication? Or Hanukkah, my other Bible
Yeah,
says.
Hanukkah, and it's also called the Festival of Lights.
Verse 22, yeah.
Yeah. You did say that we didn't talk about verse 16, I think it is.
No. Oh, that's right.
Um,
the one where it says, I know my sheep. No, there are other sheep of mine not belonging to this fold, whom I must bring in, and they too will listen to my voice. I suppose that's like, that was verse 16, is it? Yeah. That's
16. And then the next bit is also part of it. And there will then be one flock and one shepherd.
Yep.
And that makes it very, very clear that in Jesus' mind, he was thinking about the prophecy back in Ezekiel, just at the time when the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem. And he was a prophet in contact with the exiles, and he was lamenting the fact. Actually, it might even be a good idea to read that together.
Yep.
The bit in Ezekiel chapter 34, because it comes to the conclusion there. Yahweh says there will then be one sheep, one flock and one shepherd. I think almost the same words as Jesus uses in John 10. So it seems
What
like
verse?
it's Ezekiel and verse 23. I'll place over them one shepherd, my servant David, and he will tend them. He'll tend them and be their shepherd. I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant David will be prince among them. I, the Lord, have spoken.
So where's the clue there that's talking about sort of not just the Israel, but the whole world?
He says, no, he's talking to Israel. I will save my flock, and they will no longer be plundered. I'll judge between one sheep and another. I'll place over them one shepherd, my servant David. No, it doesn't say there. There must be somewhere in there, I think, where it does say that there'll be one flock. Because what he was doing was saying that there won't be the two parts, Judah and Israel, but he'll join them together.
Yep.
And but he is speaking about, he's speaking about Israel. But there are parts in the Old Testament where it does talk about the Gentiles being accepted into the same kind of relationship with God as Israel had.
Mm-hmm.
Isaiah comes to mind at the start of Isaiah, where I can't remember it, but in I think it's in chapter 2, where I should look this up. I haven't looked about it for a long time, but looked at it for a long time. But this is what Isaiah, son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as chief among the mountains. It will be raised above the hills, and all nations will stream to it. Many peoples will come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, so that we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem, and he'll judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many peoples. They'll beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. Come, O house of Jacob, let us walk in the light of the Lord. So, yeah, Israel saw a time when the Gentiles were going to be incorporated into this kind of relationship with God that they had as a nation. Does sound a little bit like we have to become subservient to Israel, but I think really it's subservient to God, creator of Gentiles and Israel. But Israel is his instrument to bring us back to himself.
And obviously the original blessing to Abraham was a blessing for lots of descendants for the land. And I'll bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. Is always meant to be that blessing that would go out from Israel to the rest of the world.
Yeah. Doesn't it say, I'll make you a blessing for all nations? Something like that in that Abrahamic covenant?
There's a few times where that covenant happens.
But in Ezekiel chapter 34, the explanation for Israel's destruction by the Babylonians, or for God allowing it to happen, Yahweh allow it to happen, is because the shepherds were not good shepherds. The shepherds of Israel, the leaders, were corrupt, totally corrupt. And that's what chapter 34 of Ezekiel is about, or what Ezekiel's speaking about in chapter 34, that the Lord was going himself to become the shepherd of Israel. And that has a huge application when Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. He's thinking, I think in the back of his mind, that where God promised that he was going to be the shepherd for Israel in face of the failure of their leaders, then Jesus was taking that role there, right then, before their eyes, that he was Yahweh taking control of his people. And that makes a lot of sense to me then, that if the sheepfold represents Israel, and that the robbers and the thieves and the robbers that come in over the fence to wreak havoc amongst the people, these are the false leaders, the people that Jesus threw out of the temple, actually, right at the start of his ministry, back in chapter 2. And it's a little bit like when he says, I am the door, he says, all that came before me were, the sheep paid no heed to any who came before me, for they were all thieves and robbers.
Yeah.
Which is a little bit harsh to say about the prophets in the Old Testament and all the saints and the good people, the good kings. And yeah, people who honoured God in the Old Testament times, they all weren't bad. And I think he's talking about the ones at the present time, the ones that he had experience of, like Caiaphas and the rest of the Sadducees who were high priests in the temple and rulers in the Sanhedrin, and they were corrupt. That's you just have to say that from the evidence that there comes through in John's gospel and the other gospels too. So Jesus saying that he's the good shepherd is a way of saying, here I am, God stepping in like I promised to do back in the days of Ezekiel, and I'm here to take charge of the sheep.
Mm.
And that's what he'd actually done. The whole lot's illustrated by the man who was born blind. And the rulers had questioned him, and John shows the bloke's a clear thinker, and he's just simply looking at what Jesus did, and he just can't accept the conclusion from the Jews who question him. They're saying, "Give glory to God. We know this man is a sinner." He says, "Well, whether he's a sinner or not, I'm not theologically educated enough to be able to say yes or no, but I know this. I used to be blind and now I can see." And he's forced just by the effort of the leaders of the Jews to make Jesus into a sinner because he was breaking the law. He's forced to think it all the way through, and he has to say in the end, if this man was not from God, he couldn't have done what he's done.
Yeah,
and that's
right.
been Jesus' argument all the way through. It is in the next section of John 10 that we're talking about. They asked him whether he was the Messiah, and he said, "Well, I've told you, but you won't believe. The deeds that I do are the evidence. This is the evidence." And they just wouldn't believe, but the man did, and as a result of believing, he got kicked out. The shepherds were failing completely to look after this sheep, and it says Jesus found him and said, what is it? Do you put your trust in the Son of Man? And his answer, again, just clear-minded. He's a hero. I'm really looking forward to meeting him one day in heaven. I really think just the way he thought things through. But even when Jesus talked to him and asked him, did he have faith? Faith in the Son of Man, which is important in itself. Faith in the new thing that God had done by sending the Messiah. No, by becoming the Messiah in the Son of God, becoming one of us. That whether the blind man accepted, or the healed man accepted that, and his answer was, "Tell me who he is, sir, that I may put my faith in him. Tell me who he is, sir, that I may put my faith in him." And yeah, I've been thinking about Jesus' answer this last week, and it reminded me of when Philip went and got Nathaniel. Remember at the very first, and Nathaniel was struck by Jesus simply saying, "I saw you when you were under the fig tree," and then he said, "You're the King of Israel. You're the Son of God." Nathaniel's response was so complete that something terribly significant must have taken place there under the fig tree, and there was something compelling about Jesus being part of that experience of Nathaniel. So much so that Nathaniel accepted him as Messiah. And when Jesus answered the blind man, he said, "You have seen him. Who is he that I should put my trust in him?" And Jesus' answer was, "You have seen him. Indeed, it is he who is speaking to you." And there must have been something like what happened with Nathaniel when Jesus said, "You have seen him." Yeah, like the man's blind. I don't know what it would be. I don't think anybody would know what goes on in somebody's mind who was born blind. I mean, we shut our eyes and we see black. And if we think, we can imagine scenes of all kinds around us, our memory. But somebody born blind, there'd be nothing there. And yeah, what happened in that man's mind, you know? But it was something that somehow or other, when Jesus said, "You have seen him," indeed he it is who is speaking to you now, that whatever was in the man's mind ever since he became a thinking, conscious being was correlated with seeing Jesus standing there talking to him, with such an impact that the man immediately said, "I believe, Lord," and became the first of Jesus' followers, probably outside of the fold, outside of the sheepfold. This is a new thing that's taking place. He's a Jew. The man who had been born blind was a Jew, but there's a new thing happened. He's been rejected by Israel and then accepted by the Son of Man. And yeah, this becomes probably one of the sheep outside of the fold that Jesus has called to himself. And he's saying, and there are others of my sheep, not part of this fold, meaning that us Gentiles, I imagine, and that Jesus' purpose was to go to the Gentiles even then, right back at the beginning, that the Messiah came to Israel for the world, and he died for the world, not just for Israel.
That was a huge challenge to their worldview, wasn't it? In the same way that the blind man was a challenge to their worldview, because they just assumed that he was sinful or his parents were sinful and he deserved what he'd gotten. And so they saw that he was outside of their picture of who could be right with God, whereas Jesus turns that all upside down. And so now this one who is rejected is actually the one who can see the clearest and who shows what true faith is and what a true response to Jesus should look like.
Yeah.
And in some ways he becomes like like you're saying, the first of the new, those who are outside, the outsiders who come into the true sheepfold because they listen to the shepherd's voice, they hear his voice, and they can add it up, they can put it together, they can see obviously his actions line up with who he's saying he is, and so he must be who he's saying he is.
I really love that, Lucas, just like you put it. I think anyone who looks at the facts and thinks clearly like that man born blind did will come to a faith in Jesus. Where was it? Back in chapter 6, I think. Yeah, where Jesus said, "No one can come to me except the Father draw him, and no one who comes to me, and the man who comes to me, I will never turn away." And then a little bit later, he says, "It's written in the prophets, they shall all be taught by God. Everyone who has listened to the Father and learned from him comes to me." I think that's...
and he's a representative of this new type of person, isn't he?
Yeah. Who listens to the Father.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Just beautiful.
Yeah.
There's something pretty important there that I think it needs to be focused upon. It says there's going to be one shepherd, one flock and one shepherd. But the flock is already, like, it's not in the sheepfold. And apparently, it's certainly in the authorized version, where it says, what, I have other sheep who are not of this, who don't belong to this sheepfold, whom I must also lead. And the translations previously said not that there'd be another flock, but there would be another sheepfold, that they would be, I haven't got it right in my head right now, but it's important to remember that the church, the new people, are not going to be an extension of the sheepfold that was Israel, but that it's already outside of the sheepfold, and the other people are brought not into the sheepfold that Israel was in, but into being the part of the flock that has already been led out. And it points out that, well, I think it makes the point that our unity as Christians isn't because we've got a new sheepfold or an extended sheepfold around us, but because of our relationship to the shepherd himself.
Yep.
And it's our following him that make us part of the flock, rather than being put in through a door and closed in.
Yeah. And it's interesting to look at that as well, that it's like a bit of a foretaste of what it's going to be like for those who enter the new sheepfold, or who listen to the shepherd and follow his voice. Because we see that the man born blind is rejected and kicked out of the synagogue. And the Jews, it seems like they hated anyone who wasn't a Jew. That was just their worldview.
Yeah.
That was the way they saw it, even though there were these little clues in the scriptures that the Gentiles would be brought in, and that they were meant to be a blessing to the whole world. It was a huge shift in their worldview to welcome the Gentiles when they did come in. And it took a pretty big sort of move or act of the Spirit to make that possible there with, you see it first of all with Peter and Cornelius. Yeah.
I wonder how, like, I've been invited into Jewish families, and I must have been a bit of a disturbance, because it was a ceremony where we dipped apples in honey and other stuff before a meal, and I had to be instructed step by step, so that I would have been. I'm thinking particularly of one family I was invited to share a meal with them, and they were lovely people. They didn't show any kind of animosity to me at all. And when I first became a Christian, and I thought, boy, I better find out about what Jews really do. So I went to a synagogue for a few Saturdays, and apart from telling me I had to wear a hat and telling me that my cap with a pom-pom on it wasn't the kind that they had in mind, they accepted me, and I didn't have any sense of like I wasn't welcome. I was a bit of an oddity. So they probably didn't have very many Gentiles come in. But I suppose there's a superiority, and that's what gets up our noses. The fact that they think that they're superior to us. And they got good cause, I suppose. So the first people called into a nation. And well, I suppose everything is breaking down in these days. Israel become a nation. Jews being persecuted everywhere, hostility from all of the nations, the Muslim nations around Israel, the Arab world, and evangelical church in America, powerful, but siding with Israel, and now a messianic church grown up of Jews who believe that Jesus is the Messiah. And so we're in a huge flux, time of change. Exciting.
Yeah. I suppose it's just worth, we've probably nearly used up our time, so we probably shouldn't start the next section. But it is worth, just coming back to that attitude that is really needed from us. The one that sees what God is doing, thinks it through, and then responds with that faith.
Yeah.
So important.
I think it's really important to see that blind man, Jesus, he'd been through the whole process of facing the fact that here he was healed, and against the hostility of the Jewish leaders who were wanting to somehow or other nail Jesus as not from God. That was their aim. He'd faced that hostility and thought it through pretty boldly, and come to some pretty firm conclusions. But Jesus still needed him to make that step of faith and commitment to believe in him as the Son of Man. And just that facing the facts, thinking it through, coming to conclusions is still not enough without that, I believe, Lord, the kind of decisive effort to put all of your trust upon Jesus Christ, to believe in him as God become a man for our salvation.
And there would have been a cost for him in that, wouldn't there? Like he would have been, it wouldn't have been easy to live in that society, alienated from the sort of the religious institution, which was tied up with everything.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that would have been a big cost for him to put his trust in Jesus as his Lord.
I was actually thinking about how he'd been a beggar, but he couldn't be a beggar any longer. He obviously had a good mind, but his handicap had held him back. I wonder where he went from there,
Yeah.
What did he learn to do for a livelihood? What did all of his neighbours think? The people that he knew, his family, they were all scared from the leaders.
Yeah, his parents were, weren't they? Yeah.
But I don't think that could have lasted. The character of this man would have forced them to come to terms like he did with the fact that he was born blind and now he had sight, to start with at least. And there were a lot of people too, like a little bit later in the section that we have next is where there was a division amongst the people, and some said he was demon possessed and mad and you shouldn't listen to him, and others said, could a man who is demon possessed speak like this?
Yeah.
And would an evil spirit be able to heal somebody who was blind?
So people are struggling. They're trying to think it through.
Yeah.
And they're arguing and discussing amongst themselves, obviously a lot, because they can see the conflict that's going on there with the leaders and with Jesus. They can see what Jesus is doing. They can see hear what he's saying, and it makes sense to them. But it's such a huge shift for them that there's a lot of disagreement and struggle to work it out. And maybe these sorts of people, these were the ones later on after his death and resurrection, and these were probably the fruit that was ripe when Peter started preaching.
Yeah, and they would have made up the first church, the first followers, when there were thousands who became Christians and of those Jews and were baptized and formed the church in Jerusalem.
Mm.
It's probably heard somebody read somewhere that it only takes 20% of a group of people to unite with some purpose, whether it's good or bad or ugly, and the 20% are able to bring the 80% along with them.
Mm.
Not because the 80% necessarily agree with them, but simply because there's that inertia amongst us, and the need for leaders to step up and to step forward and to say, "You're right," like this blind man did. Jesus really is somebody bigger than what you think he is, and to step forward and be leaders of those who are being kind of influenced by the 20% who are just negative in this case.
Which really raises the question, what does that look like for us today?
Yeah.
How do we be that sort of 20% who are counting the cost and acknowledging that Jesus is Lord and bringing our lives in alignment with that reality?
Yeah. That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
My determination is to speak about God naturally. And just to somebody wrote to me asking whether I would go down to Melbourne to marry them, and like to do the performance, to perform the wedding ceremony. And I don't think they were Christians. They were just looking around and got my name off the website. And it was easy for me to talk about marriage coming from the perspective that this is God's creation and we're making commitments and doing it before God. They finally dropped off, dropped out. But I could have just simply said, yeah, I've got the license, I can marry you. And if you pay my expenses, I'll come down and do it. But I may hear back still, I suppose. The COVID shutdown has been a little bit of a stop plans, but I think that's what I have to do anyway, is to identify as a follower of Jesus Christ. Oh, actually, talking about the sun panels going on the roof, and the secretary for Paul and his company is called Denise. And she was asking for a copy of the power bill that we get from Red Earth, is it, or Red something or other, Red Energy. And I got into a discussion and told her about thinking of how God works with us and in us if we make ourselves open to Him. And it was just sort of natural to talk about that in that context. And I haven't a clue what she's going to think, but
yeah. No, it's
that's my response. But I don't know. Others don't think that we shouldn't be so aggressive and in people's face. But I don't know. I don't know why not.
Well, it needs to be part of who we are.
Yeah.
And come through.
That's my belief too, Lucas. Totally. That We have to be transparent so that what is in us is able to be seen by those who know us, meet us.
Yeah. And know where that's coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. That's probably enough for today.
Sorry, we mucked it up a little bit. Didn't get into the business.
That's all right. We'll get on to start from verse 22 next time.
Done. Done.
That was very good. All right. See you soon.
See you soon. Yeah. Pleasure. Bye now.